It is Friday, April 3rd. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another $900 episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. This is your final call for the March PS Plus Essential lineup. This coming Tuesday on the 7th, it's going to change over to Lords of the Fallen, PlayStation 5, Sword Art Online, Fractured Daydream, PS5, and Tomb Raider 1 through 3 Remastered, PS4, PS5 as well. Now, Lords of the Fallen is good. That's certainly a great game to check out if you're into that sort of thing. SAO, I have no experience with, so can't tell you much about that, but I will say for Tomb Raider 1 through 3 Remastered, and a lot of trophy hunters know this tip, but play the PS4 version because there is 3 individual platinums. The PS5 native version has that odd stipulation because it's a single executable, so it's only 1 platinum shared across 3 games. So if you want to go back to the classics, earn some platinums, you're going to be doing that on the PS4 version, not PlayStation 5. Anyway, moving on to some PS Studios news, we have Housemarque confirming that Saros has gone gold ahead of its April 30th release, so that means the studio is now done with the 1.0 build of the game, and they can release it on time, which is great news. My only concern, based on the timing of the announcement, and if they were maybe late on this or whatever the case is, but if there was a good lead time on printing a full Gold Master that is playable offline on the disc, so that remains to be seen. I'm still concerned about that, but at the very minimum, the game is done, so that's good. And I also wanted to mention one key gameplay detail, a few details from the previews that came out last week, and this is another big thing where they're addressing concerns from Returnal. So the runs themselves are going to be much smaller, or shorter rather, than Returnal. So we learned this from the lead game designer. They explain that they want to balance the danger of losing progress, which is certainly a part of a roguelike experience, but they also want to reduce the stress of not losing 3 hours of progress. So we're hearing that runs take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to complete per biome, which compared to Returnal, with the structure of that game where it's 3 biomes in the first half, 3 in the back half, and you can't do all 6 in a row. You can only do 3 of the first or 3 of the second half, but that would take upwards of 2.5, 3 hours. Depends on your own pacing, obviously. But in this case, if we assume it's a similar structure, not to say it's 6 biomes total, 3 segmented each, but if we assume it's a similar structure, that at least implies that you're looking at an hour and a half to do, let's say, 3 biomes. So certainly a lot shorter than Returnal, and it does give you that one more run sort of roguelike hook that games like Hades are so well known for. And they also mentioned that the game has multiple save slots as well, so you've got that, autosave, and the option to suspend a run available on day 1. Crucially, that was a big problem with Returnal on day 1. The game had none of that, so they recommended using PS5's rest mode feature, which people were like, okay, but that's really the only way? And then they would do that. Sony would deploy a firmware update on PS5. If your console had settings enabled to do that automatically, you just lost your run. So they didn't update it till much later, but it really is much better to have that on day 1. Even if, yes, people can save scum, you have to have something there in place so people don't lose that precious progress. So add that to the list of things where they are directly addressing it from Returnal. It seems like they are nailing everything so far, and now the game has gone gold. Moving on to an incredibly insightful interview and podcast where we learned so much more about The Last of Us multiplayer from the former game director at Naughty Dog, Vinit Agarwal, who was directing this game, and so recently he was speaking with Lance E. Lee on their podcast, and he did indeed dive into a number of things, which the one thing we heard a long time ago about this game is that it was almost done, and that appears to be true. Vinit says it was almost 80% done actually, so very, very close. It was in development from 2016 to 2023, and he explains the game kept getting funding well into the COVID pandemic because that's where everyone was investing, was the multiplayer games. Sony too, because this was a multiplayer game, so people were at home playing more games. We all know what went down there, and so the game was doing really, really well internally, but as the money was drying up in 2022, a decision had to be made, which was make this game or the next game Neil Druckmann is directing. And Naughty Dog decided to choose the project that was the bread and butter of the studio, so that was Intergalactic instead of what was considered more experimental with The Last of Us multiplayer. And of course, Agarwal says this was devastating to him because he found out 24 hours before the public did, which is insane, but that does tend to happen quite often. And he also broke down his thesis for the game as well, which was based on his own real-life experiences of being robbed in Texas and then also being chased down and harassed in New York City. So he wanted to emulate the same feeling of people getting desperate to find resources, which in this case would have been an apocalyptic universe, with it being The Last of Us. Which that might sound insane, but it's very similar to many other game directors that, base their own life experiences and put that artistic approach into the game themselves. And for Vinit, he actually broke it down further of like how he was able to reconcile those real life experiences by playing this game internally over and over again. And it must have really helped him with that fight or flight response, feeling that in the game, and then able to sort of not have nightmares anymore from those experiences. It's an incredible thing, and it was therapeutic to him. And it really does sound like it was devastating because he spent 7 years on that game. And his career is really fascinating too, because he talked about how he worked at initially mobile game studios like Zynga and one other unnamed game studio, but he didn't like how analytical they were and how they were very predatory towards their primary audience, which were basically middle-aged women. And he wanted to get into a more prestigious studio, landed that job at Naughty Dog, climbed the corporate ranks very fast, and got to direct games. It's incredible, and it sucks that, unfortunately, based on the realities of the games business, more so the whole COVID scenario, that this game was shut down. And, it's still very similar to the other talks we've had about this game in particular. I still have so much conviction in that. From all the live service stuff that Sony has been investing in, and now we have, in the wake of all of it, multiple cancellations and studio closures, this was the one. I mean, this was the one that just seemed like, on paper, a slam dunk. The property is incredibly strong, and now we see that, yeah, the gameplay loop very likely was a sort of extraction PvP, probably E element. The Cordyceps virus has to be in there, right? So, and we kept hearing that the game was really, really good. But, there was this clear negligence on probably both Naughty Dog and Sony's part to let them go this long making this game, not realizing that, oh man, like, what are we going to do? Because one, the money's drying up. Two, this game would have undeniably ate up studio resources as well. If this game launched, the kind of resources it takes to consistently keep releasing new content for that game is something Naughty Dog was not known for at the time. And they're still not known for that. They're a single-player game studio. Yes, they've done sort of boxed, closed multiplayer, arena style, but Naughty Dog was still unknown to the element of what it takes to maintain a live service game. So there was that fork. One was still a great option, which was a brand new single-player experience, a new IP, which, I mean, that's great, but it's so devastating for this one team in particular in that they just spent so much time on one live service game that conceivably would have probably done pretty well. And I've seen people say like, oh, I would have liked that game. But because that didn't happen and it took so much time, now we're taking so long for Intergalactic and it's hard to establish new IP. And so the end result is one of PlayStation's best studios not putting out a game on PlayStation 5 for so long. It sucks, it's terrible, and I really feel for Vinit because when you hear it from the game director themselves, it does sound so much worse. And at least he's doing a lot better. He's in Japan now. He's got his own game studio. He's got an unnamed publisher, so he's doing well, but the whole story is just so fascinating. Moving on to some next-gen PlayStation hardware news, where we had so much going on because this past Friday, Sony confirmed the price increases. They're now in effect for PS5, which means where does that leave PlayStation 6? We had a rumor on Tuesday we discussed where Kepler L2 on NeoGAF was going over the PS6 rumored price cost of about $760, and that Sony could, in theory, subsidize to avoid a $1,000 console. And then we talked about how Kepler responded to somebody asking about if the console will have a disk drive and storage. They said no disk drive and 1 terabyte of storage, which we should clarify for the disk drive thing. We still had that very well-sourced report from Insider Gaming. That was a Tom Henderson news story about how Sony still plans on having 2 SKUs at launch, 1 no disk drive, 1 without. So Kepler is not implying that there is no console with no drive, just that the base machine, what sort of price tag could we expect? It would be 1 terabyte and no disk drive included, possibly in that $750 range. Still very expensive, but they did make a new follow-up post saying that storage is the most obvious area to cut costs, and if the PS6 SDK supports neural texture compression, we could see game saves be even smaller than PlayStation 5. So that's one area to navigate the potential issues of the storage cost that is going to be on Sony, and then them trying to, again, avoid a very high cost for their next-gen console, which is still semi-custom APUs, Therefore, they're in a very difficult spot to pump the brakes on launching that. And that's still the ongoing discussion about next gen and if Sony will launch it holiday 2027. Now, I will say, yeah, I think at this point we are looking at the base machine still being very expensive. It's going to be even more when you have to throw in that disk drive. 1 terabyte storage for another generation of consoles. PS5 Pro launched with 2 terabytes, so unfortunately that would be the one thing that is probably going to have to be cut, which I think makes the most sense very clearly. If anything, though, it would help if there is some sort of breakthrough in making sure that game saves, or rather game installs, are just a little bit smaller. The issue is that textures are still ballooning, so game files are still relatively large. But if anything, I would argue that on PlayStation 5, they've been mostly in check. We did see with Kraken compression on PS5 that PS5 versions were generally either a bit smaller, sometimes significantly smaller, or just a little bit bigger than PlayStation 4, which was pretty impressive. And PS5 is very mature now at this point. It's been around long enough. So yes, we do have games that are hitting 80 gigabytes, sometimes easily over 100, but there are very much a lot of cases where the games are more modest than you would expect, certainly in comparison to PS4. So I would hope that that maybe is a breakthrough they can lean on a little bit if we are looking at a console with 1 terabyte minimum of storage. So it's not ideal, but it's certainly something that seems very plausible for what is still considered a rumor. Now we have another rumor from Kepler L2, again over on NeoGAF, where this time it was a thread going over the rumored PS6 handheld and where the power benchmark is going to be compared to current platforms like the Switch 2 or the Xbox Series S. And so Kepler chimed in, saying that the handheld's GPU is ahead of the Series S in rasterization and massively ahead in ray tracing and path tracing performance. Which, if you recall, that's exactly what we heard from Tom from their channel, Moore's Law is Dead, is that on paper, the specs that they put out, this thing actually does have increased RT performance over even base PlayStation 5 hardware, and also any sort of breakthroughs or advancements for PSSR. Obviously PSSR 2 at minimum, but maybe PSSR 3 would be there to really bridge that gap of image quality for what is going to be a handheld playing these games locally, so that's still very important. Moving on to a new PlayStation acquisition. And no, it's not a game studio, it's a technology company, which, big surprise here, it's machine learning and computer vision. So over on the SIE blog, Sony has confirmed they've acquired Cinemersive Labs, which is a UK-based machine learning and computer vision company that was founded in 2022, and their team brings in specialized expertise in computer vision and machine learning, and they're going to join SIE's own visual computing group and contribute directly to the state of art visual computing in games. So this, in theory, enhances gameplay visuals, improves rendering techniques, and unlocks new levels of visual fidelity for players. That's at least what the SIE blog would have you believe. And as for Cinemersive itself, it does seem like their primary technology is actually a very specific use case of smoothing out the parallax effect. So the company itself is very small, like 10-something staff members small. So if you saw this, I'm not sure there's much to really think of here outside of it's one of those things of very big company wants to solve one specific issue, and there is another small company out there that does that. And it's not like they want the company, they want the talent, they want the proprietary tech that they've probably achieved in-house. Buy them, bring them in. They're literally just buying these people's jobs more or less. They're going to dissolve the name, I would think, too. I mean, whatever the case is, that's probably what's happening, so I wouldn't think much of it. It seems like, again, a very particular use case of what they're looking to achieve. They probably want their proprietary technology for something like PSSR. In other PlayStation business news, we're hearing some not-so-good things for the PS Studios mobile division, which, if you remember from the recent post from Jason Schreier confirming the Dark Outlaw game's closure, he did mention 50 layoffs for that particular division at Sony, and now we're getting this report from mobilegamer.biz about a LinkedIn post from one of the affected employees, and they're claiming the entire mobile division has been shut down. Which Mobile Gamer does say they still understand that MLB The Show and Ratchet & Clank Ranger Rumble are still continuing. We still have Steel Frontiers for PC and mobile, that's from NCSoft, and then also NetEase recently helped bring Destiny Rising to mobile. So things are still happening, but maybe we're hearing that Sony is walking away from this formal establishment of the mobile division and maybe trying to do more things. It's hard to say, right? Because if you remember, the mobile division was established in 2022. That's when they brought in the former head of Apple Arcade, Nicola Sebastiani, the year prior to establish their mobile efforts, and then they left in 2023. But then Sony acquired Savage Game Studios in between that, 2022. They renamed them to Neon Koi, but then they shut down in 2024. Then they appointed new heads of mobile. That's Chris Davis and Olivier Coutamage. So they've, like the live service initiative, been having some very hard troubles, a tough go of it per se. And, building up to it, it was always the bull case of, you have no presence in this space, so how do you establish something in that marketplace? You bring in the right people, poach talent from other companies, and you've got the head of Apple Arcade joining the company and establishing a new culture, a whole new team of staff members that know what they're doing and have expertise in the space. It all made sense on paper, and it was one of those things where they were doing everything right, but we see a few years later that for some reason or another, these things just did not come together. We don't really hear much of anything about their mobile efforts, so it seems like the whole thing was just kind of messy. It's hard to say outside of pure speculation, but maybe PlayStation's now coming to the reasonable conclusion of maybe it makes more sense to just do what they've been doing, which is sort of cherry picking individual things that make sense with external partners, and that would be your NCSoft or OBB for Ranger Rumble, and just seeing where that gets them outside of trying to have this grander vision of a whole separate division that's going to be handling these things. Maybe they're just starting to realize that as far as the corporate structure goes, they really don't need that, but it's hard to say. If anything, though, PlayStation has just always completely crapped the bed on their mobile efforts. These games almost always are terrible, and just they've never made a decent foothold. And once again, they have found themselves in the exact same spot. I'm wondering if this is, again, another direct consequence of Hideaki Nishino just making more short-term changes right now and shutting something like that down. Moving on to some third-party game news, we have the Xbox Game Showcase and Gears of War E-Day Direct, which will happen right after, confirmed for June 7th. And as we safely expect now with Xbox Game Showcases, you can watch as a PlayStation fan, and there will be various PS5 announcements. The one thing is that we are having a bit of a holdout here for Gears of War E-Day because that game, as of right now, is the last holdout of not being confirmed for PlayStation 5 just yet, so people are curious if that will end up happening. There's also some fan theories going around that Halo Campaign Evolved will shadow drop right then and there, so it's something that we should always say, you'll want to keep your eyes peeled for that, and we'll of course cover the show here on LTPS. In other Xbox Game Studios news, we have Starfield launching very soon on PS5, and it looks like we have another situation of a complete failure of a physical copy. Because recently highlighted on the Does It Play account over on X, where this was based on an early copy secured by the user KLSK, the game disc does have 81 gigabytes that's installable, and I think that is the full game, but upon launching it, it asks for an internet connection to update Starfield. So this is a very egregious example where it's not a stub print of the game. 81 gigs is the full thing, because I believe that's what's been pulled from PSN, so people know that's the base game's full content. So they printed the full game on the disc, but they did put a hard-coded prompt that it needs a one-time online handshake or maybe pulling a patch or something, but whatever the case is, there's game content on there, the full vanilla base game, and you can't play it without installing online at least once, which is just, this is what I mean. It's very egregious, and I'm really getting tired of Bethesda doing this, especially for games where the excuse is not there. These are games showing up to PlayStation later, like your Indiana or Starfield, and that they're known games. I mean, I understand that in the here and now, even for games that are getting PS5 versions, there's embargoes, NDAs, and there's new content for this particular version, but that's still launching day and date with the Xbox Ones. It's annoying. You should be printing the full thing on the disc and not barring people from launching it if, God forbid, they get the physical game a little bit early, because now you've just printed how many discs that are effectively not useless, but you know what I mean, they're tied to a server now at this point. So it really sucks that they dropped the ball on this one, and I would think, are going to continue doing so because nothing is changing. Moving on to Shift Up, the developer of Nikkei Goddess of Victory and also Stellar Blade, where since going public, they've really been growing and doing more and more ambitious things, and now they've recently acquired Shinji Mikami's new studio, Unbound. So they did confirm that the new studio formed by the horror legend is being brought into the studio, and Shift Up is going to be publishing everything that they're making, and so right now they're working on their first project for consoles and PC, which is being described as a new IP built in UE5. So huge deal for Shift Up. I mean, it really is incredible how far they've come ever since Nikkei and their Sony partnership, but with them going public, it was something we were talking about back then. They very clearly have ambitions to become a much bigger studio with all that capital now coming in, and so this is one of the first things that they're doing, and that is some incredible talent that they've secured. I just hope that relationship stays good and they take care of Shinji Mikami and they foster creative talent and allow him to do what he's so well known for. Next up, we have a rumor about the long-standing rumor for Final Fantasy IX, the remake remaster that we keep hearing about. This comes from Nate the Hate over on their personal channel, going over a recent podcast release where Nate was talking about a number of predictions and leaks for the Switch 2, but in there he did mention and provide an update for the Final Fantasy IX, again, remake remaster project. He was saying that the last update he's heard is that the game is still on ice, so he said that Square could return to it one day, but based on what he's heard so far, there has been no movement on it, which is actually the same thing he said previously, that it's on ice. So the update is that he's not really heard anything new. For whatever reason, whatever happened with that game and the development cycle for it, which I think we all agree it doesn't really need much. It can be kind of like a Crisis Core reunion type of deal. It doesn't really need to be brought up to 7 remake standards or anything. So you would think on paper it's a relatively straightforward project, but something must have went wrong, and now this game is just not coming out, which is really a huge bummer because we know it's probably a real thing. It was on the NVIDIA leak list, but that doesn't guarantee it's going to come out, and now it seems like there's still been no movement. In Capcom news, Pragmata has gone gold ahead of its April 17th release, so even closer as far as them confirming that compared to Housemarque and Saros. So again, I still hope that there's like a good gold master for the physical print that they are doing, but it is still noteworthy in that Pragmata was, for a long time, people were somewhat thinking, oh no, is this a deep down? Is this vaporware like we saw on PlayStation 4? But no, this game is indeed being brought to market, and so it's now finalized. That's great. I mean, obviously the demo was out there. We knew this was a real game at that point, but it is still exciting. I always like highlighting that, hey, this is new IP, and it's very unconventional gameplay. It's very different, and so it's a really exciting thing to have a big publisher like Capcom back this project, and it actually is coming out. So it's gone gold, and it's coming out soon. Now, unsurprisingly, we have continued bad news going on in the games business with various layoffs. A very high-profile one was Eidos Montreal. They recently confirmed a number of layoffs, 124 jobs, and the studio head, David Onfasi, is leaving, which we've since found out from Jason Schreier on a Reddit comment of all things, that this was due to a cancellation of an original game that was in development for years and had a lot of issues. And since then, we've had this report from Insider Gaming that this game has been worked on for 7 years. It was codenamed P11, but supposedly named Wildlands, and it cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It was apparently this open-world third-person action game about a teenager protagonist named River, who was part of this magic-wielding teenager group known as the Spearbounds, and you could ride on a giant moose-looking creature and travel around the map at a really fast pace. And so, based on sources, we also heard that game, that premise, it was apparently almost complete. So it was almost done, launching later this year, and now canceled. We don't know why, but we got a premise, a whole, I guess, synopsis of what this game was. Almost done, 7 years, hundreds of millions, shut down. Crazy, absolutely nuts, and it is so annoying when something like that happens. Conceivably, it sounds like maybe Embracer didn't believe in bringing it to market, investing more in marketing the game, because there still is a substantial amount of money to see it over that, what seems like a close finish line. There is still more money that has to be put in, so maybe they wanted to write the whole thing off, which is terrible, especially when you lose that many people. And this team has not been able to put out a game since their acquisition or since they were acquired in 2022. But my God, this one stings, especially because it sounds like a cool new thing, right? We just talked about the importance of new IP, and even that stuff oftentimes doesn't get the chance to show itself when it was almost done. Next up, the effects of artificial intelligence is being felt more and more in the games business, and one area of discipline that we thought was probably going to be hit hard here is localization, and now we've got a very human individual story being shared by one person, Max H., where they were a localization specialist that worked at Warhorse Studios since July 2022. They were working on Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and they recently posted on the game's subreddit letting people know that they were fired after getting replaced by AI. Apparently, the mods of the subreddit verified their identity, and their personal LinkedIn shows that they did leave the studio this month, but in this very lengthy post, they do say this was an effort from the company to make it more efficient, save some finances, and now his position is obsolete. So this is a very by-the-book story of human talking about, hey, this was my job, I was replaced by AI. We can always sort of break it down to a numbers thing and how AI does have a place in games, but this was one area of game development that very likely was going to get hit, and it really sucks to hear like one individual story about it and how they're obviously upset, right? They feel betrayed and let down by their employer, but it's another cutthroat example of how you are simply a number at these companies, and I hate that. But what also really sucks is that localization, like, yeah, you can sort of on paper totally understand the idea of AI can come in, replace that labor, and if you want to boil it down to simply that of saving finances. But the reality also is localization is so important for a human element to deeply interpret the nuances of language and the meaning of certain things and how that should be translated to a different language. I would still think you need a human for that, at the very least, to sort of babysit the use case of how AI is going to be brought in to at least speed up the process or something. But it really sucks that this was a black and white case of human gone, AI in. If that is what they're doing on a more broad scale. I'm not sure if they were the only localization person there, but it's just it's awful, and we're going to be seeing more of this, and this is one of many layoffs, whether it's a direct result of AI or just the economics that we're in right now, but it's just, this was really tough to read. Some other layoff news we can mention is the VR developer Polyarc, where they're well known for developing Moss Book 1, 2, and Glassbreaker's Champions of Moss, which is their multiplayer Moss game, but they recently confirmed on LinkedIn that they've had to significantly reduce the size of the company following the cancellation of a major project. Which, the Glassbreakers thing as a multiplayer game, and it's VR, so that alone already is going to make it very problematic for that game to probably make money. So I would think that didn't do well. This other game they were working on, they don't say it. They don't say how many staff members were let go, but I'm thinking that it was probably backed by Meta, because we know Meta's been pulling away from the virtual reality investment and heavily downsizing there with all their studio closures as well. So if they were funded by Meta, then I would think, yeah, the money's dried up and they were not able to find somebody else. But the thing about the really tough position we are right now in the games business is that for VR, those developers have got to be feeling even more nervous, because even when games were really healthy, VR is still a struggling marketplace because it didn't really balloon into what everyone thought it was going to be 10 years ago. And I still believe in VR. I don't think it's gimmick. I think it's a wonderful way to play games. It's so immersive and incredible, and if you're into those type of experiences, you do get it. It just really sucks that it's still, for the most part, relatively niche compared to the wider gaming space. So for a talented studio like Polyarc to be running into problems, not finding funding, that also signals some ongoing troubles, which we've been in for basically 3+ years, longer than that. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. You can follow the link down below or scan the QR code and enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel in a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. those are some of the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And we had two conversation topics. Our initial Friday video going over the price reaction for PS5, and then Tuesday going over the rumors and also industry analysis for where the PS6 price might end up being. And then coming up, I finally have another games industry interview releasing probably on Tuesday, which that'll go into some VR stuff, so the VR landscape. Be on the lookout for that very insightful conversation. And also the Patreon and YouTube channel membership Q&A should be going live very soon, so I did film that. Thank you all so much. It was a huge turnout, like 80 something questions, and it was like 4 hours long, so that will be releasing soon, even though it was the March Q&A coming out a little bit into April. I apologize, but that's done, and then that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.